So there's some fabulous people performing with plants in New Zealand, and we'd love to showcase one of them today, Kieran Monaghan, who is a percussionist, musician, a man of many different talents, installation artist. So I want to have a chat with you today, Kieran. This is actually the first time that we have met because we have been exchanging emails, and Mark from Circuit Moving Image, Artist Moving Image, was the one who recommended us. So shout out to Mark and the marvellous work they do. So Kieran, tell us a little bit about you. What makes you tick in this business with plants and percussion and music?
Well, kia ora, and thanks for inviting me to have this conversation with you. I really appreciate the chance to be able to talk about this in this forum. Equally so, as you mentioned, we've just met. I know very little about your project as well, so I'm hoping to learn about what you do in biosignals, etc. through this. So a bit about me. Born in 1970 in the deep south of New Zealand, down in a place called Gore, which is well named. It's always not my most favourite place in the world. It's well known for its country and western music. I gravitated towards punk rock fairly early on in an oppositional sort of style to the world down there, and entered music making in the 80s in punk rock bands, in the antisocial domain and the oppositional format. It seemed to fit best with my it was the tension between being alive and being down there, and that kind of set me up well. I think I gravitated then towards a punk rock of a more sort of intelligent kind of nature. I was attracted to the politics that developed after the first kind of business mode of that kind of music. I was drawn to the animal rights of it, the equality of it, the environmental aspects of it, the egalitarianness of it, I think. Still being quite young, so that is kind of the basis of where I came from. I left there, and I've been in Wellington since the early 90s. I was a parent early on, so in my early 20s, I've had children in the early 20s, so was of that demographic of being a young person with not much to do. So you either end up in trouble with the law or alcohol or becoming a parent. Options were short, shall we say. But all the way through that, my interest in music has maintained. It was music that made me move to Wellington in the hope of exploring it further. Parenting kind of changed that. But I remained playing. And I've remained playing all that time since. I've got a label called Sturted Records. I've had a band that has recently just ended called Mr. Sterile Assembly, and that had been functioning for about 20-something years. Put out a number of albums, travelled heaps overseas, always being interested in sort of community organising and stories from a less than represented sort of communities. Alongside that, though, I also was responsible, and I held down a full-time job. I've been working in the health profession for about 25 years, and about 17 or 18 of those I worked as a nurse. And then I've recently ended that. Recently, in the last 3 years, from early 21, I stopped working for a number of reasons. And in that time, sort of have had a bit of a sort of change, not a midlife crisis, but there's been a lot of things change in my world that has got me to this kind of project at the moment. I was never particularly interested in electronic music. I was never particularly interested in that kind of realm. I always liked hitting things. I'm a drummer, but where are we, 24? So at the start of 2023, I came across an album by this bloke called bloke. I'm assuming pronouns there, but I came across this person, Eric Salvaggio, and he released this album called Worlding, which was like generating. It was an album of music made where he had connected mushrooms into this thing called a modular synthesizer. Excuse me, and out of that came this really quite organic sounding, rhythmic-like kind of music that didn't have the rigidity and the conformity of what I historically had associated with electronic music. And that kind of really attracted my attention. I mean, I've always had fairly broad tastes and always looked for things of a more kind of odd nature. And I was ripe, I think, for exposure to this thing at the time. It grabbed my attention. I had no idea what a modular synthesizer was, but I did want to learn how to make music like that in this kind of other than human kind of way. And I had been aware of some of the books and popular science that have been coming out over the last 10, 15 years about like mycelium and the connection between species and like between trees, and then with mycelium in the middle, and these kind of conversations of symbiotic existence rather than individualist existence. And I was aware of these things while I was still working in the nursing world. Like there was conversations around like gut biome, the gut and brain connection, the Lawson gut biome has a correlation. Some studies were saying between things like increased expressions of depression and other sorts of mental illnesses, and so that sort of stuff was really fascinating. I guess that kind of gets us up to today, where we are. That's how I found this kind of music. And then I embarked on a rapid learning curve of discovering what a modular synth was, and then learning how to drive one, because I couldn't even make it work when I first got it. Trying to buy the equipment to be able to enable the signals of the plant to be fed into the machine. A bit of research around how to wire up sort of TENS cables, and I'm really fascinated with the idea of this like interspecies collaboration, this collaboration beyond human, or this human and other, rather than the Enlightenment way of thinking, a human at the top of the pyramid and then everything else sort of descends out underneath. Like trying to think about ways of flipping that round. And this project seems like a really nice way I've been able to explore that.
And I think you recently, I think the way that we found each other is that you recently had a gig. Was it a performance or an installation of some sort? Was it Utopia? I kind of remember the name of it that I had been having a look at. It was something really, really fascinating to do with a utopia, perhaps, where plants and humans are collaborating. Tell me a bit more about the particular most recent thing, I guess.
So the show was called Mundane Utopia.
Okay.
Held at the Audio Foundation in Auckland. I did a week residency the last year, just kind of, it was in the really, really early days of trying to establish how this project would work. And they invited me back to make an installation into that space. So if your listeners aren't familiar with the Audio Foundation, it is sort of, I don't know if it calls itself this, but it's like the national home for experimental music, performance, adventurous music making. What I set up there. So I have this group, and it's called Vegetable Machine Animal, and I call it a trio. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the thinking around my work is based around a bunch of reading, but one of them is a guy whose name is escaping me at the moment, something Brittle, who put out a book last year called Ways of Being, English writer, I think. A lot of his writing was about challenging the way we think about intelligence and the different kinds of intelligences that exist in the world, and the expanding of the idea that we need a bigger definition of the word intelligence now in this world where we have much broader understanding how different things function. To use some of his framework, so I take the intelligence of the plant within the synthesizer, and I can explain more of this, but within the synthesizer, a lot of intelligence has been imbued into that, and the creation of it, and the thinking of it, and the writing of the programming for it. And then if I'm being kind to myself, the intelligence of myself as the performer. And so when you take, and to break that down right down into the most basic sort of form of what intelligence is, it's this is a very lay definition, it would be that a signal was received from somewhere, it is interpreted into mean something, and then a response is made in relation to that interpretation. Be that the mycelium knows to grow fungi because it gets warm and moist. It interprets that change in the environment, and its responses to produce fruit. The machine of the synthesizer, a signal would come into it. It interprets that, and the output is a particular kind of waveform that would be different to a different signal that come in. There will be different interpretations. So even though it's not a conscious thing, it sort of follows that process of the way signals are interpreted and responded to, and then travelled on down the line. So anyway, so the project in the Audio Foundation was to establish that machinery into the gallery. They surrounded it with greenery and plants from the area, and some of their employees sort of kindly offered stuff to accommodate it. The show was installed for 3 weeks and didn't require me, so it just kind of burbled away in the background. So like the sensors were attached to the plants, and so these two sensors work like an ohm meter. They pick up the electrical signal between the two and send that signal with that moment to the machine that will then turn it into sound. And I like to think that it works like Google Translate. Google Translate is it's still a crude form of translation, but is really brilliant when you're traveling. You chuck in a signal of like phrases or words or whatever, and it provides a translation of that gives us some sense making, but not complete sense making, because it still can't translate body language and intonation and all those kind of things as well. And in addition to the synth, there was another smaller module which people could interact with and play around with the different channels of sound coming out of the synth. They could also interact with the plants themselves, which is probably the more interesting part. You can spray water on it, touch it, hold hands with each other, and then the people at the end can hold on to the plant, and that creates a great big circuit, which then causes a different change in the sound. It's a really interesting and really fun thing to offer people. That, and it kind of creates this excitement of the aliveness of things. And of course, people always kind of know that they're alive, but when you can actually participate in the aliveness of other things, it becomes quite engaging in a way that I think surprises people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, fantastic. Yes, absolutely. There's lots of connections actually for Awhi World. I mean, Awhi World is a kind of transdisciplinary lab, and we do all sorts of different kind of business. Two things that are very pertinent to this discussion are the biosignals, first of all, which I mentioned, and that's a project between Open University of Philippines, an artist or a few artists who are located in the UK, and us. And it's a British Council Philippines funded project. And essentially what that is to investigate and send signals to one another and then create concurrent installations at the end of it where we're exchanging signals live. It's actually a cultural exchange project. It's kind of a project funded by essentially a diplomatic organisation to support countries to exchange ideas and collaborate and build practice together. We are using kind of a parallel system to the modular synth system you're talking about. So we're using Arduinos with different kinds of array of different sensors, and we're uploading those to a server and exchanging them at a server level between us. And those sensors that we're using differ depending on the country. We've got someone in our team who is investigating pretty much electro signals from plants directly, but we're probably using more eco data, so humidity and soil, temperatures, etc. And the reason we're doing the ecosystem, but there's a bunch of other different sensors we're going to be deploying soon because it's part of our research, is we're really interested in that idea that you picked up on earlier or spoke about to do with aliveness of the world, and the fact that we often think a plant is an individual thing, but it's actually part of an ecosystem. Mycelium's a really good example of that, right? It's like that can spread over kilometers. So we're interested in how you kind of have an ecosystem talk to another ecosystem. That's what we're kind of researching. And we've done a little kind of test to the public already in May when we had a lab that was open to the public. And what we're wanting to do is visualize those signals in a kind of visual, but also less sound and more visual. So ours is more a visual representation, not just kind of a informatic showing, this is the temperature in the Philippines, or this plant is like desperate needing water, but more like pulling the signals together and actually creating visual works that actually combine the signals together in creative ways. So it kind of visualizes our partnership, if that makes sense. We are using sound, but a lot of the research we've done so far has mainly been in the visual area, but it's not to say that we can't translate that into sound. The other part that is really connected also to what you've just said, in fact, extremely aligned, is that we've just launched what we call the Strange Intelligences Lab. And that's a very loose research collaboration. And what we're interested in is the relationship between different kinds of intelligences and how, when combined or when worked with in different kinds of ways, how they can help us learn or engage with bigger issues that we have. So we're a transdisciplinary lab. We're all about trying to get people from really different walks of life to talk together. So the transdisciplinary nature of the Strange Intelligences Lab means that we're focusing on, for example, AI. We're really interested in spore intelligences like moss and algae and fungi. We're also interested in kind of the different kinds of intelligences that we have as humans, and also, I guess, collective intelligence, because there's a different thing that's just, you've been in bands, Kieran, there's a different thing between you as a person, but when you work together as a group, it's like there's another whole thing. So it's that stuff, right? So we're kind of just in the beginning stages of kind of looking at how they relate and what work or stuff comes out of it. So it's entirely pertinent to what you're discussing in terms of how do we relate. And I guess some of the things related to that are things like ethics to do with plants. You spoke earlier about animal rights, but then we don't often think about plant rights. And so, we're chopping down things and killing things left, right, and centre, and all about plant-based food and aromatherapy and this, that, and the other. But that actually is like a really awful thing in a lot of cases to do to plants. Like, let's get a whole field of lavender or 10 fields, harvest all of it, and then get like this much aromatherapy oil so that we can use it and destroy the soil in the surrounding area as a result. But it's really good for our holistic well-being. Do you know what I mean? So that kind of stuff we're very interested in as well.
Yeah, apparently. I always get a bit annoyed when there's too much lavender around and about.
So I guess one of our last year we had an incubator project, and one of our participants also used modular synths with plants. So we're a little bit. I'm interested in the modular synth area, also because it becomes a little obsessive as well, because people have like 17,000 modular synth parts and they're always just predicting them. But it's really fascinating. One of the things I'm interested in is in terms of connecting with the plants. What did you use? Did you use the same system that they use to kind of test for like lying? You have those sensors that you kind of use as they're like human medical things that you not electrodes. I'm trying to find the word right now. I have read it, Kieran, but I can't remember. You've got a nursing background, so you probably know more than me. It's like something you stick on things, right?
Yeah. So the sensors. So first, I'm not terribly interested in the modular thing per se. It's a useful tool, but I'm really interested in keeping it limited and portable and not making it the center of attention, because then that distracts. It's just a translation device. The module in it that enables the whole project it's called a Scion. It's made by a person in Scotland, I think. There's a company called Instro. And I think it's just I think it's an act of luck that he has made this thing that is actually relatively cheap. I mean, I think this technology has been around for decades, but it's kind of been locked up in academia and not been available to people who want to do other stuff rather than academic study. But it's cheap now, and it's available to use. And what it requires is sensors, and they are called TENS connectors, TENS sensors from a TENS machine. So a TENS machine is probably something people might have come across in the physiotherapy world, and often it has wee electric pads, and you stick it onto you, and it would send a small electric current between the two pads, and it kind of stimulates damaged or injured muscle tissue or nerves. I don't fully understand how. I'm not being a physiotherapist, but in this case, the sensors are from a TENS machine. That they do not send signals between the two sensor points. So no electrical current is coming from the machine into the plant. So there's no ECT in the plants. There will be every single living cell has an action potential, the ability to produce electricity. And so when these two sensors are on the leaf or the crown of a mushroom or whatever, it just detects the signal between those 2 points and then sends that into the machine. From my understanding, it converts it then into a signal that the modular synth will be able to use. It's like measuring the temperature in real time. So it changes over time. It changes with interaction, with photosynthesizing plants. They can be really active during the sunlight hours, and then they go quite dormant when the sun goes down. It's been happening for millions of years, billions of years with some of these species, and so those changes are then become audible.
Oh, yeah, cool. No, that's interesting. I when you said it, I remembered the name. But so, what is the next evolution of what you're doing, do you think? Like, where are you going with your research? What interests you? Is it something where you feel like, oh, I've done that? Or is it like, no, I'm really interested in this next phase of it? What's your trajectory around this kind of thing?
What's my trajectory? I want to be known as that guy that makes music.
Yeah, I think that's probably been done there's a few others, unfortunately, in terms of a niche. But I mean, in terms of how it fits in your bigger practice, because obviously you're not just that guy, so there's a bunch of other interesting things going on for you as well, right?
Yeah, I wanna. So, well, when I started looking at, the only people I could find making music with it were a bunch of hippies with recorders, and it just didn't really appeal to me very much. No offense if anybody watching does that, but it's just not my buzz. I'm really interested to see what I can do with it, as dumb as that sounds. It's like, I want to be able to take a plant into a pub and set up on a stage and have my trio play to a group of people, and it's going to always be unique. It's never going to be repeatable. It's going to bend their brains in a way that hasn't happened before. Surprises me continuously. It's an absolute challenge to sit in the seat of a drum kit and then just respond to what another species is doing. Like I think that's a fascinating challenge. How do you learn to listen not like a human? How do we? And these, I don't know whether these are realistic statements, but what does non-human music possibly sound like, or what? How do we think about placing ourselves in a horizontal interspecies framework rather than the Enlightenment model, humans at the top, white male humans at the top, and everything else sort of trickles down underneath? I think there's a lot of really fascinating thinking. Well, let me just say, it's not really research. This is just an obsessive sort of, like, I'm not writing this down or anything. Well, maybe I might be, but this is just an obsessive folly. But I'm really in this, well, let me start on a rant. In this time of like culture change, climate change, it's like, I think it's really important. Like for decades, people have been saying we need to change the way we think about things to be able to change the way we do things. And I think the arts has an essential role in helping us to change the way we think about things by presenting things in a different format. And not that I'm trying to be grandiose about this, but I'm just trying my little bit to change the way we think about things. But like, there's a lot of, like, I'm really interested in having a science-informed music practice. Like, I think that's really important as well. I'm not sure what you think of this, but I'm not entirely sold on the idea of like gong baths and music therapy and sitting down and listening to bells and stuff like that. Does any kind of healing whatsoever? Probably the act of being there does, but the playing of the things doesn't. I want the science behind that to be ordinary and accessible, so we don't have to make up some fantastical narrative about plants talking. We don't have to anthropomorphize it. We can just go, it's happening. We don't understand it in a human way, but they do their own thing, and it's still pretty amazing. So we don't need to come up with some other kind of story that is, to me, sits a wee bit more in the realm of like charlatanism. So I want to step back from that. And I also that, again, in the time of the Anthropocene, whether that's a phrase that you use as well, that it's essential, again, for people doing creative practices and stuff like that, not to get sucked into the Hollywood trope of the dystopian. I think it's a really easy cul-de-sac to fall into. The everything's fucked. The world's doomed. It's all going to hell in a handbasket. Some parts of it maybe, but maybe not. And I think that also needs to be something that's challenged in the way we think about things. It's like it's a if I was being coarse about it, I think it's a lazy way to think about what's happening to the world. It's convenient, it's easy to understand, but I don't think by any means it's accurate. Like I'm not denying that things, what the science says. I'm not denying that the oceans are warming, that the species are becoming extinct. I'm not denying any of that at all. But I think we need to find other ways of telling that story. That there's that wonderful book by Donna Haraway, Living with the Trouble, I think it's called, about things are broken and will continue to be broken and damaged for some time, but we have to find ways of being within that experience. And while we are being in that experience, we also need to be able to be hopeful and joyous and be able to share love and empathy and connection and create community. If we're all living in this dystopian thing at the end of the world where everyone's running with a dog and a gun, it's like, I'm not sure that's a future I want to invest my creative potential in.
Yeah, no, I understand. And it's interesting because I guess for me, I can relate to a lot of things you're saying. I often wonder if the dystopia comes from the worry that humans may not be around, or that humans may be around in a way where they can't enjoy nature. But I've talked to a number of people, particularly I had an interview with somebody, Maori creative artist, who was like, well, plants probably, unless there's some dire situation, are pretty much going to survive. It's just us that are screwed. So it's like, and then we're the ones that are like, and it's very interesting that we kind of, it feels like still the lens of, when people are thinking that way, the lens is from, human civilization might be in trouble. And I'm like, okay. So, there's a lot of, it's getting people out of the mindset to see the mindset that I think is half the business. And when you spoke before, that simple act you spoke about going to a pub and having a band that was 3 players, and then I was the blood. And I was like, that's a really nice way of if you're an animist, that would be a great way of describing it. Or if you're following, you could be giving people a lecture on a certain kind of philosophy or whatever. But it's just, it's like you don't have to have that because people get that immediately, which I really love. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's collaborative. Do you?
Because most of the world doesn't go to university, and most of the world doesn't understand a lot of that stuff.
Oh, and most of the world can't, and nearly all of the world can't access journal articles that people write. We actually, most of the stuff we do when it's research just goes out in a blog. We don't, generally speaking, write the university papers because it feels very much like an echo chamber. Although, we access it and use it, and there's rigor around what we do. It's we're not academics. We kind of escaped academia. And so most of my background is 30 years working at grassroots community or organisational level around the world or here, where it's really working with people who've got real world issues who, they're not really going to understand transdisciplinary that or this and that and so forth, but they might get it if you just said, hey, it would be really helpful if you're doing this particular project, if you invited a few more people than just the council, some scientists and some managers, you know what I mean? So they get that stuff. But I mean, the stuff that you're doing is really interesting. And I really love the fact that you talked about it in the context of your political activism type background as well. Like your practice has always had a activist side to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so do you think?
Well, I wouldn't. I think activist is sometimes a word like academic. Like there are plenty of people that do great activity and contribute that are not activists, and to bang somebody into an activist label makes it a specialty discipline rather than an ordinary everyday thing that everybody can participate in. So I don't tend to describe myself like that. But
how would you say that though, given that you've got, I mean, you chose kind of, you were so yes, I understand what you're saying. So this is really interesting to me. So you had a kind of background, I mean, I've done lots of action and stuff like that, but I also probably wouldn't call myself an activist per se. But you chose a kind of branch of music and a way of engaging that wasn't electronica and it wasn't hippie recording, and punk has often been an it's like a disestablishmentarianist kind of thing, right? It's often like this.
Well, of course, yeah.
What you're doing now with the plants, do you feel that they're aligned with what you were doing maybe around animal rights, for example, or is it less like that? I'm kind of interested because we did something recently on plant ethics, and I kind of want to see where you feel about that.
I think the short answer is yes. I think there is a continuity in all the work I've done over the years in terms of like the ethical position that I have adhered to at the time. I mean, I still stand by the things around animal rights. I've been like vegetarian for like 40 something years. That's still an important part of my one of my value systems. But I think over time, like the parameters of it sort of change. So simply just talking about the animal rights for a moment, I've had problems with the monastic approach that many animal rights people have had over the years. 90s, when veganism became really popular for the first time amongst. It wasn't popular like now, but it was popular amongst minorities, sort of youth movements and stuff. It felt like their way of arguing it was very Christian. Should we say, everybody must be vegan to make everything right. And it's like, yeah, but that really sucks from an indigenous perspective. And that's just another form of colonizing. It's like we're telling you how to be. They may want to choose to do that, but they have to be able to come to that in their own kind of way. It's like, how would you argue with someone from the Inuit community that they could not eat seal anymore?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's a really pertinent kind of question. And so does that inform how I work with plants and fungi now? I can't say I've like the plants rights thing is interesting. I don't know if I've thought about that in this kind of context, and I don't know what that looks like. We are like somewhere in the interspecies kind of coexisting one species eats the other, and the cycle goes. Some species produce things that are to be eaten as a transportation method for carrying seeds across distances and stuff like that. And I guess rather than going to the extreme of going just like some of the Christian veganists in the 90s was like all animal products are bad. I'm not sure how I would feel about somebody going, all plant products are bad as well. Is that the plant rights kind of movement stuff? Because it's not anything I know about. But
no, we did in fact, Jared, who's producing this call, did a very interesting presentation on a book about plant ethics. And I think it was more about, and that could maybe perhaps part of that, to actually consciously consume plants rather than just assume it, for example, which people did with animals. They just kind of presumed they were there for us to eat rather than, well, we're part of an ecosystem, we're eating them, whatever. But I think there's a whole array of different ways you can view it depending on where you stand. Like maybe they're instruments for us to consume. It could be that you're a Jain and or a particular kind of religious point of view, you might have to engage with them in a very different way if you're going to consume them. It's very difficult not to eat any plants though, right? Like it's kind of,
what do we eat?
What do we eat? If we can't eat animals and we're not eating plants, then the only hope we have is to grow 3D printed fake produce out of nothing. I don't know what we do.
Yeah.
But I think it's something, Kieran, for me about consciously engaging with other intelligences, not just presuming that we're top of the rung, therefore they get to be eaten or used in a certain way. Or I'm an artist, so therefore I'm going to grab a whole bunch of moss and put petrol on it and burn it as my installation for the planet. I'm like, well, that's ironic because you've just killed all these plants for it's where does the integrity come, I think, in terms of engaging with them? It's more about conscious use, right?
Yeah.
I know, I was interested in that because I mean you're working with plants, but in the particular way you're doing it, you've got a couple of things on it, but it's not passing a current through the plants. But whereas others might be, for example, shoving into the stalk to try and find out if they can actually get a signal from into, you know what I mean? Like it's intrusive, for example. So
yeah, I mean, I have had people ask me, put these things on. Why don't you rip a leaf off or something around and see if you can hear that? I mean, I do. Thinking about this while you're talking, I have noticed, like when I use my plants at home, there are some that I favour more than others, but I end up having a different relationship with them, which is really cool, which is really neat. They maybe get a bit of care if I'm damaging them. It's like, when I just did a bunch of shows in Indonesia not long ago, and I had to go find plants in the venues, and most of them were fairly dilapidated and uncared for. So I had to go and get them like 4 or 5 hours before I played and made sure they were watered, and I weeded them, and I sort of gave them some TLC. So it's more than, I mean, ultimately I am exploiting them, but if I can make it a bit more kind of, if I get something out of it, that's kind of
mutually enriching. Yeah, mutually enriching. We've probably got I probably have a bit of a chat with you afterwards as well, Kieran, but in terms of this, there's one more thing I want to ask you, and it's a completely parallel world.
Yeah.
How are you finding support generally for artists who don't fit easily into the box? Like, that maybe like yourself, you're kind of working, you've obviously got a sound practice of some sort, but you're kind of creating an installation, or you're doing something that's a little bit outside of the bounds. And Audio Foundation, we've had a little bit to do with when we were at Auckland, is definitely in the experimental, out of the bounds kind of area, right? Do you find that artists in New Zealand, compared to when you go overseas, are recognised or supported if they're not necessarily kind of fitting exactly in a discipline?
New Zealand has never really had much truck for anything of experimental nature. It's a small place. It's a village on the global kind of stage. I think it's also probably unreasonable to expect that they should, that everybody in the country wants to listen to 50 minutes of circular breathing saxophone or some yob on a drum kit playing a mushroom. It's like, well, that's okay. But does that stop me doing it? No, I just think you just get on and do it and don't complain about it. I mean, I've never been of the disposition to base the stuff that I do on whether I get funding or not. Most times, I've never bothered applying because it's just an arduous, painful process that's never really been worth it. So I will just find other ways of doing it, and I guess I come from like a working culture. It's like I will, you know, I got employed so I could earn an income to supplement the stuff that I really want to do. And I'm okay with that. And I have no qualms about working hard. Other countries have really generous kind of civic kind of authorities that fund art. Places like France, communities in like Central Europe, some of them are very supportive of stuff that probably we would consider a bit more fringe, but over there it's just recognised it has just a different kind of value beyond capitalistic value. It adds other things to the culture that you just can't buy. You have to allow it to flourish. I mean, and this New Zealand doesn't really like, you know, not that I'm terribly interested in Flying Nun very much, if you know of that label. When it in its heyday, like I was pretty young when it was starting, but I was aware of it happening, and they were a bunch of weirdos for the first few years, and then it kind of hit this platform, maybe in the late '80s or early '90s, where it started attempting to get international traction, and it lost that really interesting edge of uniqueness that came from just these bunch of weirdos scattered around various places. But now, something like 45 years later, it's championed as like this great thing. It's like this country likes to sit on its laurels when things are far enough in the distance.
Yeah. And I forgot to tell you, you were saying when you were born, I was also born in 1970. So I also remember Flying Nun, Fetus Productions, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's kind of an area that I'm interested in because I'm interested in how we support people to do cool things, how we support people because when you're in a situation where some people also are having trouble with their want of a better word, day job, and they're kind of working to support their practice over here, but the working that they're doing is probably most of the time, and they're stressing to kind of get that done. It makes it harder to actually do a bunch of other things. Creative practice sometimes comes third or fourth for some people.
I understand. And if you've got kids, and I've got kids, like I studied and I was working, studied and raised children and sort of held a relationship together and also held creative projects together. Everybody has to find their own way
100%.
about it. I wouldn't want people to model themselves in the way that I've done it. I think I'm pretty bloody-minded and probably not everybody's favourite partner. Like I'm persistently doing stuff.
But I guess that's the thing that I'm really enjoying about what you're saying. It's like you're trying stuff out and you're doing interesting things, and I really like what you were saying about you're not just kind of doing it and tinkering, but you're thinking about, okay, well, this is intelligence, and it's about me, and it's about collaboration, and actually it relates to climate change, because unless we change the way we think, we can't actually change the way we do, right? So all of that stuff is really interesting. It's not just, hey, I'm just going to bash some stuff around this plant. That's the bit that I was really interested in today. Just like, it's actually a rich practice, right? It's based on years and years and years, and it evolves out of some real thinking and reflecting on a whole bunch of different values that you've had and that you've held for a while.
I mean, you asked me before what comes from this. I haven't mentioned it, but I have just been successful in obtaining a residency in Wellington that's run between the School of Music at Victoria and Te Whanganui-a-Tara. So that's like a 12-week gig where I get paid to just sort of bang the drums and see what I can do with this. So I'm really, that starts at the end of September. So I'm really grateful for that, for this intense period of time to like hothouse this and see what else I can do. Like I want to find ways to to bring this project to academia, not by becoming an academic, by finding ways to get academics to come and engage with me. Also, I'm interested in ways of keeping it, at the pub level, that I can just go play a bunch of kids, and just turn up and play. And also, I want to figure out how to, take it to schools. Like this is the thing. I've never been very good with boxes and genres and staying within the lane. I don't quite know what that is. So this is. There's no rules involved. I can go wherever I want. I'm just going to see how many different shapes I can bend this octopus into.
Well, I mean, this is probably a good time to kind of wind this part of the discussion up. Thank you, Kieran, for sharing all of that, particularly with someone you hadn't met before. Thanks again to Mark for introducing us. Shout out to Circuit, who do such great work. Shout out to Audio Foundation, because they are awesome. It would definitely be great to keep in touch around the stuff that you're doing around our Strange Intelligences Lab and your Strange Intelligence practice as well. So, and a big thanks to British Council Philippines for supporting the Biosignals project. That is the context for this discussion today. So thanks a lot for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.